The ground trembled beneath their feet with every step, a constant reminder of the abyss that awaited them. After being humiliated and cast out, Clara and her children found refuge where no one else would dare, inside a colossal fossilized tree trunk, swaying precariously on the edge of an active landslide. But what seemed like the end held an unimaginable secret within its stony depths. The colossal trunk yawned before them, a gaping maw of petrified wood. Its interior was a cavernous darkness, smelling of damp earth and ancient stone, a stark contrast to the biting wind that whipped outside. Clara pulled her children inside, their small bodies trembling with cold and fear. A low whimper escaped Tomas, the youngest, as he clung to his mother's leg. Maria, a little older and wide-eyed, watched their new, frightening home. The silence of the hollow space, broken only by the wind howling outside, making the trunk creak like a ghost ship adrift. The dim evening light barely penetrated the jagged opening, casting dancing shadows on the inner walls, which seemed sculpted by a bizarre artist. The surface was rough and cold to the touch, with stone veins that snaked where the tree's sap once flowed. Clara made an effort to calm her children, hugging them tight. "It's all right, my loves. We'll be safe here," she whispered, though her own heart hammered in her chest, belying her words. The ground beneath their feet was uneven, covered by a mix of loose earth and fragments of petrified wood that crunched with every step, a constant reminder of their refuge's instability. The first task was the most urgent, to create a minimally safe corner for the children. Clara scoured the ground with her hands, gathering dry leaves and small branches that nature had deposited there over the centuries. She piled them in a less steep corner, trying to form a makeshift bed. The smell of mold and damp earth was strong, but the warmth of their bodies together was a small comfort. As she dragged a flat stone to use as a prop, her fingers brushed against something unusual. It wasn't the coldness of stone, nor the roughness of wood. It was smooth, hard, and metallic. Curious, and with adrenaline still coursing through her veins, Clara knelt, pushing aside the debris more carefully. The object was partially buried, obscured by dirt and rock fragments. She dug with her fingernails, the loose earth yielding easily. A faint gleam erupted from the darkness, a reflection of what little light still entered through the opening. It was a small object, the size of her palm, with an irregular shape and edges that seemed to have been faceted. As she pulled it out, the dirt fell away, revealing a polished surface that caught and refracted the scant light, emitting a golden glow mixed with greenish and purplish hues. Clara's heart leaped. It wasn't an ordinary stone, it wasn't metal. The texture was strange, almost organic, yet with the hardness of a gem. She turned it in her hand, feeling its unexpected weight. A scratching sound from outside made the trunk vibrate slightly, and Clara clutched the object to her chest, fear returning, but now mixed with a pang of fascination and hope. What was it? And how had it come to be there, hidden in the depths of that fossilized trunk, overlooked by everyone? Her children, oblivious to the discovery, were already dozing, nestled together, while the wind outside continued to sing its melancholic song, and the gigantic trunk groaned under the weight of time and precariousness. Clara felt the object's weight in her palm, a strange mix of fascination and terror coursing through her body. The golden greenish and purplish glow emanating from the polished surface seemed to dance, a light of its own that defied the growing darkness within the trunk. The wind outside howled, its ghostly melody making the gigantic trunk creak and groan, a sound reminiscent of an ancient ship battling a storm. Her children, oblivious to their mother's tension, slept deeply, their small bodies nestled together, offering a glimpse of peace amidst the chaos. Clara turned the object again, her fingers tracing its irregular edges. It was no ordinary jewel, nor any mineral she had ever seen. The texture was smooth, almost glassy, yet with a resilience that suggested something deeper, more ancient. She noticed small symbols carved into one of its faces, so fine they were barely discernible in the gloom. They looked like hieroglyphs, or perhaps a script from a forgotten time, etched with a precision impossible for primitive tools. The object's glow pulsed softly, almost like a beating heart, and Clara felt a subtle warmth radiate from its surface, heating her palm. A wave of questions hit her. What was it? How had it come to be there, buried beneath layers of earth and petrified wood, in the heart of a trunk no one dared even touch? Was it a relic, an artifact of some lost civilization that inhabited these mountains before the landslide? Or something more? Mystical. Logic dictated it was just a strange stone, but the feeling the object conveyed was of something alive with a story of its own. She remembered the ancient stories her grandmother used to tell about the mountains, about stones that held the earth's memory, about spirits that dwelled in the most inhospitable places. Clara had always considered them mere legends, tales to frighten children. But now, holding that object which seemed to defy reality itself, a sliver of belief began to seep into her skepticism. The hunger, which until then had been dormant due to shock and adrenaline, began to gnaw at her stomach. The night's chill deepened, and the damp air of the trunk seemed to penetrate her bones. She needed fire, warmth, something to eat. But the discovery of that object had shifted her priorities. This was no mere rock. If it held any value, it could be the key to lifting her children out of their desperate situation. Carefully, Clara wrapped the object in a torn piece of cloth salvaged from her few possessions, tucking it against her chest, beneath her clothes. The warmth it radiated was a small comfort against the biting cold. She knew she couldn't stay there forever. The trunk groaned again, a deep, ominous sound that seemed to come from the earth's depths, and small grains of sand fell from the uneven ceiling, a constant reminder of the imminent danger. The next morning, the faint light of dawn revealed the true precariousness of their refuge. The sun barely managed to penetrate the trunk's opening, casting pale beams that danced in the suspended dust. The children awoke, their large, hungry eyes fixed on their mother. "Mama, I'm hungry," Maria whispered, her voice hoarse. Tomas, the youngest, merely whimpered. Clara felt a pang in her heart. She had to act. But how? The mountain was a danger, the town a place of humiliation. She needed answers about the object. She needed to know if this was the fortune her intuition screamed it was. With a new sense of purpose, Clara began to examine the trunk's inner walls more closely. The object had been found there. Perhaps there was more. She scraped away loose earth, felt the indentations of the petrified wood, searching for any other gleam, any other anomaly. Her fingers, already calloused by a hard life, searched tirelessly, while the wind outside blew in strong gusts, making the trunk sway slightly, a movement that sent shivers down her spine. With each sway, her heart leapt, but the newfound hope was stronger than fear. She wouldn't give up, not now. She found more, not objects like the first, but small, glittering incrustations on the walls, veins of a similar material that snaked like luminous roots through the fossilized wood. They were small, but numerous, shimmering with the same iridescent glow. They weren't loose stones, but an integral part of the trunk's structure, as if the tree itself had absorbed that mysterious substance over millennia. The trunk wasn't just a refuge, it was a treasure. The realization hit her with the force of lightning. The tree wasn't merely fossilized, it was imbued, perhaps even transformed by that substance. What they had found wasn't an isolated object, but the manifestation of a much larger phenomenon. A secret nature had guarded for ages, waiting for someone brave enough to look where no one else dared. Clara froze, her breath caught in her throat. The revelation struck her not as a thought, but as a visceral truth that resonated through every fiber of her being. The trunk wasn't just a shelter, a last resort, but an ark of treasures, a secret of nature that had waited for centuries to be discovered. Her eyes scanned the uneven walls, now seeing not just petrified wood and earth, but veins of pulsating light, an iridescent map of hope etched into the darkness. The object she held close to her chest, that isolated fragment, was merely a sample, a key to the vastness that surrounded her. A tremor from the earth's depths made the trunk groan loudly, a sound of old wood and stone creaking under pressure. Small pebbles fell from the ceiling, and the suspended dust danced in the pale beams of dawn. Her children, awakened by the noise, let out small whimpers, their eyes swollen with sleep and hunger. The brutal reality of their situation returned with force, mixing with the euphoria of discovery. What good was a treasure if they couldn't eat it or use it for warmth? Clara clutched the object to herself, feeling the faint warmth it radiated. She needed answers, and fast. With trembling but firm hands, she began to examine one of the nearest glowing veins. It was embedded in the rock, an integral part of the structure, as if it had grown there. She tried to scratch it with her fingernail, then with a small, sharp stone shard she found on the ground. The material was incredibly hard, resisting any attempt at removal. A scraping sound echoed in the trunk's silence, but the glow remained intact, untouchable. Frustration began to set in. What seemed to be the solution now presented itself as a new enigma. How to extract that substance? How to prove its worth? The city, with its merchants and sages, seemed a distant, inaccessible world. And even if she managed to reach it, who would believe the story of a homeless widow who found a treasure in a fossilized trunk? It was more likely they would call her mad, or worse, try to rob her. "Mama, water!" Maria pleaded, her voice weak. Tomas reached his small hand for his mother's breast, seeking comfort and sustenance. Despair threatened to swallow Clara whole. She had to think. She had to be clever. Still holding the object, she stood, her eyes fixed on the incrustations. The iridescent glow seemed stronger now, as if the trunk itself were responding to her presence, or perhaps to her need. She noticed that in some places the veins were denser, forming small protuberances, almost like embedded gems. One of these spots was near a deeper crack in the trunk's wall, a natural flaw in the petrified wood. With a thread of hope, Clara picked up the stone shard again, and with all the strength she had left, began to strike the rock around the protuberance. The sound of impact reverberated in the hollow space, a rhythmic hammering that seemed to defy the mountain's silence. Small fragments of stone and dust flew, but the glowing material remained unshaken. She struck again, and again, her muscles aching, exhaustion setting in. Suddenly a loud, dry crack. It wasn't from the stone shard, but from the crack itself. The protuberance, still intact, broke free from the wall, falling with a metallic clink to the ground. Clara froze, her heart pounding. She quickly bent down, picking up the new fragment. It was smaller than the first object, but displayed the same mesmerizing glow, a mix of gold, green, and purple. Joy flooded her, but was quickly replaced by panic. The crack seemed to have deepened, and a sound of sliding sand from outside the trunk became more audible. The trunk swayed with greater intensity, a slow, oscillating movement that made Clara lose her balance. A stream of sand and small stones began to trickle through the opening, a cruel reminder that every action she took inside could hasten the inevitable. She had obtained a second fragment, tangible proof of the treasure, but at what cost? The ground beneath her feet felt more unstable, the air heavier, foreshadowing an imminent catastrophe. She hugged her children tightly, the two small fragments clutched in her hand. The smell of damp earth and the constant sound of the wind howling outside, mixed with the ominous creaking of the trunk, were the soundtrack to their precarious existence. She had the treasure, or at least a part of it. Now the challenge was to survive with it. The mountain was alive, and it was beginning to move. Clara knew she had little time. She had to get out. but not without a chance to start anew. Fortune was in her hands, but her children's lives still hung by a thread the mountain threatened to snap at any moment. The trunk groaned like a wounded monster, a deep lament that seemed to come from the earth's depths. The ground beneath Clara's feet swayed with alarming intensity, and more pebbles and fine sand trickled from the opening, forming a small dune inside their makeshift refuge. The air filled with dust and the acrid smell of damp earth. Maria and Tomas were crying now, a chorus of fear and hunger that pierced Clara's heart. She hugged them tightly, the two glowing fragments clutched in her hand, feeling the subtle warmth they radiated, an ironic contrast to the chill of their situation. There was no more time to think, to plan. The mountain wouldn't wait. Clara had to act, had to get out, however terrifying the world outside might be. That trunk, which had been their shelter, had now become a trap. "Come on, my loves," she whispered, her voice hoarse from dust and emotion. "Mama will get us out of here." She wrapped the two fragments in a sturdier piece of cloth, tying it firmly to her waist, alongside the larger object she already carried. She needed her hands free. She gathered the few provisions they had left, an almost empty canteen, a piece of hard bread, and the torn blanket she used to shield her children from the cold. She wrapped Tomas in the blanket, securing him to her back with an improvised sling, and took Maria's small hand. "Hold tight to Mama, Maria," she instructed, her voice trembling but firm. "Don't look down, look at Mama." The wind howled outside, a wild lament that seemed to mock her audacity. The sound of rolling stones and shifting earth became constant, a sinister drumming that heralded the imminence of disaster. Every step was a gamble. The trunk swayed again, more forcefully, and a chunk of petrified wood broke loose from the ceiling, falling with a crash near where they had been sitting. "Now!" Clara cried, more to herself than to the children. She scrambled to the opening, the wind whipping at her hair and face. The dawn light was pale and treacherous, revealing the extent of the landslide. The hillside was a chaos of loose earth, unstable stones, and uprooted bushes. The trunk balanced precariously, its colossal weight held by a thin layer of earth that could give way at any moment. With a monumental effort, Clara squeezed through the opening, pulling Maria behind her. The smell of wet earth and the icy breeze hit her with force. She felt the ground give way slightly beneath her feet as Maria, wide-eyed with terror, tried to balance. Tomas, strapped to her back, let out a frightened whimper. "Don't stop!" she ordered, her voice almost inaudible against the roar of the wind and the mountain. She began to climb the hillside, not towards the summit, which seemed even more unstable, but laterally, seeking a safer path, away from the imminent precipice. Every step was a test of balance, her boots sinking into the mud and loose earth. Smaller stones rolled downhill, and the sound of an underground stream, now exposed by the landslide, rushed somewhere below them. The trunk, their former refuge, groaned for the last time, a sound of rupture that made the earth tremble violently. Clara turned in time to see a gigantic crack open at its base, and with a deafening roar, the colossal trunk began to slide. Slowly at first, then gaining speed, it toppled over, rolling down the slope in a cloud of dust and debris, taking with it any hope of return. The sound of its fall echoed through the mountain, an epitaph for their makeshift home. Clara felt the ground tremble beneath her feet again, this time with the force of the impact. She threw herself to the ground, shielding Maria and Tomas with her body as a small avalanche of earth and stones passed just meters from them. When the dust settled and silence, however brief, returned, she stood, her breath ragged. The trunk had vanished, swallowed by the mountain's maw. They were alone, completely exposed. The sun was a little higher now, but its rays still didn't warm the icy air. Clara looked at the horizon, at the rugged mountains stretching before them, a labyrinth of rock and peril. The city, A distant cluster of smoke and rooftops seemed unattainable. She had the fragments, the fortune her intuition screamed was the key to a future. But now, without shelter, without food, and with the mountain still trembling occasionally, reality was harsher than ever. What would she do with those glowing objects in the middle of nowhere? How would she turn that promise into sustenance for her children? Hunger gnawed at her stomach with renewed ferocity. The cold cut at their exposed skin. Maria coughed and Tomas whimpered again. Clara pressed the fragments against her chest, feeling the faint warmth they still radiated. It was a weak flame, but it was all they had. She needed to find new shelter, a safe place, even if temporary. And then she would need to uncover the secret of those objects. With a deep sigh, Clara began to walk again, ascending the slope with renewed determination. There was nowhere to go but forward. The mountain's danger was constant, but hope now was a precious burden she carried with her, a flickering light in the darkness of her journey. Clara continued to climb, every fiber of her body screaming in protest. The icy wind lashed her face, and the loose earth beneath her feet threatened to give way with each step. Maria, her small hand clutched in Clara's, stumbled occasionally, her tiny shoes sinking into the mud and gravel. Tomas, strapped to his mother's back, sobbed softly, his sound muffled by the blanket and the incessant howl of the wind. The sun, which had once promised warmth, now seemed to mock their misery, peeking through grey clouds that gathered on the horizon. The mountain was a labyrinth of jagged rocks and low-lying vegetation, with no sign of shelter in sight. The smell of damp earth and the biting air entered their lungs, making each breath an arduous task. "I want to nurse, Mama," Tomas whimpered, his voice weak. Maria tugged at Clara's skirt, her lips purple with cold. "I'm hungry." Despair threatened to engulf Clara again, an icy wave that made her stumble. She pressed the fragments against her chest, feeling the subtle warmth they radiated through the fabric. It was a weak flame, but it was the only source of warmth they possessed. She needed to find a safe place, even if for a few hours, to shield her children from the cold and the biting wind. Her eyes swept the desolate landscape, searching for any hint of refuge. In the distance, high on a rocky ridge, she spotted a dark formation, a kind of indentation in the rock, which could be a small cave or a large overhang. It was a steep and dangerous climb, but hope, however faint, propelled her forward. "Come on, my loves. Almost there," she murmured, more to herself than to the children. With a strength she didn't know she possessed, Clara began to climb. Stones rolled beneath her feet, and the sound of small, distant landslides reverberated through the mountain. Maria, exhausted, let out a whimper, but continued to follow her mother, childlike trust in her wide eyes. Finally, after what seemed an eternity, Clara reached the indentation. It was a shallow cave, more a natural shelter beneath a gigantic rocky overhang, but it offered protection from the wind and the impending rain. The ground was packed earth and loose rocks, but it was dry. She entered first, pulling Maria inside and unstrapping Tomas from her back. The three huddled in the most sheltered corner, Clara hugging her children tightly, using her body as a shield against the cold. The torn blanket was spread over them, offering a minimal layer of warmth. The cave's silence was a welcome relief, broken only by Clara's ragged breathing and Maria and Tomas's occasional sobs. She took the glowing fragments from her waist, unfolding the cloth carefully. The three objects, the largest, which looked like a polished egg, and the two smaller ones like irregular gems, shone with a soft, iridescent light, a rainbow of gold, green, and purple that seemed to dance in the cave's gloom. Clara held them in her hands, feeling the warmth emanate from them, more intense now that they were out of the wind. She pressed them against Maria's icy skin, who sighed in relief. The warmth was comforting, almost healing. It wasn't just a glow, it was a source of heat, An idea began to form in Clara's mind. She observed the largest object, the egg. On its surface, she noticed intricate patterns she hadn't perceived before, thin veins that seemed to move beneath the glow like a miniature star map. When she turned it, one of the thicker veins seemed to pulse with a stronger light, and an almost inaudible sound, like a distant hum, vibrated in her hands. "What is it, Mama?" Maria asked, her voice a little stronger, her eyes fixed on the mesmerizing glow. "It's our luck, my love," Clara whispered, her throat tight. "It's our hope." She pressed the objects against her chest again. The warmth they radiated was more than physical. It was a promise. They weren't just pretty stones. They had an energy, a life of their own. The mountain had shifted, but it had given her a new refuge and perhaps a new clue about the treasure. If they could generate heat, perhaps they could do more. The city was still a distant dream, but now, with temporary shelter and a slightly deeper understanding of the objects, the journey seemed less impossible. Clara knew the night would be long and cold, but the flickering light in her hands was a beacon, guiding her through the darkness. Night descended upon the mountain with icy ferocity. Inside the shallow cave, the wind howled outside, a wild lament that seemed to test the rock's solidity. Inside, the silence was profound, broken only by the children's muffled sobs and the sound of Clara's trembling breath. She pressed her children close, the thin blanket offering little defense against the cold that still permeated the air. Her eyes, accustomed to the gloom, focused on the objects in her hands. The warmth they radiated was the only flame that sustained them. Maria and Tomas slept, exhausted, clinging to each other, their small bodies trembling occasionally. Clara, driven by desperate curiosity and a pang of hope, lifted the largest object, the glowing egg, and slowly turned it. The hum that had been almost inaudible before now seemed to pulse in her fingers, a subtle vibration that intensified and diminished as she changed the object's orientation. The intricate patterns on its surface, the thin veins that seemed to move, now appeared to align, forming a kind of flickering arrow of light that pointed towards the back of the cave. With her heart pounding, Clara crawled silently to the back of the cave. The object extended before her like a guide. The hum grew stronger, an almost melodic murmur that vibrated in her bones. The arrow of light on the object pointed to a narrow fissure in the rock wall, almost imperceptible at first glance, hidden behind a formation of dry stalactites. With trembling hands, Clara felt the cold rock. The fissure was too narrow for her to pass through, but the air emanating from it was different, fresher, and carried a subtle scent of damp earth and something else. Something metallic, almost electric. The fragments in her hands vibrated with greater intensity, and the iridescent glow became more vivid, as if they were responding to a call. Clara tried to force the fissure open, but the rock was solid. She pressed the largest object against the crack. A dry crack echoed in the cave, and the egg's light pulsed with surprising force, casting a golden beam that penetrated the darkness of the crack. The rock around the fissure began to glow faintly, and a grinding sound like shifting sand filled the air. Slowly, with a deep groan that seemed to come from the mountain's depths, the fissure widened, revealing a dark, damp passage, barely visible in the gloom. The metallic and electric scent intensified. Clara hesitated. The passage was narrow, and the unknown within was frightening, but the promise of something, of an answer, was stronger than fear. She looked back at her sleeping children. She couldn't take them into the unknown now. She needed to be sure it was safe. With her heart pounding, Clara knelt and peered through the opening. The largest object's light illuminated a small tunnel which sloped gently downwards. The walls were of dark rock, speckled with minerals that gleamed with a silvery and bluish glow under the object's light. At the far end, she saw a small chamber, and in its center what appeared to be a natural pedestal. Upon the pedestal rested an object. It wasn't glowing like the one she held, but it was made of a dark, smooth material with engraved symbols that seemed to dance in the gloom. It looked like a stone scroll or an ancient map. Clara felt a shiver run down her spine. That place was not natural. It was ancient, perhaps forgotten, and the objects in her hands seemed to have been made to find it. She reached out, the largest object still pointing, and touched the cold surface of the stone scroll. At that very instant, a louder, clearer hum echoed through the tunnel, and the engraved symbols on the dark object lit up with a bluish light, revealing an intricate network of lines and dots that resembled stars. It wasn't a map of celestial constellations, but rather a terrestrial map, showing mountain peaks, valleys and rivers, with a bright point pulsating at its center right where she stood. And more importantly, a series of other glowing points, connected by fine lines stretched far away, towards the city and beyond. Clara recoiled, her mind reeling. This was a map. A map to what? To other treasures? To the source of that power? She didn't know, but the hope she felt now was palpable, almost overwhelming. Cautiously, she picked up the stone scroll. It was lighter than it looked, and the bluish glow of the symbols remained, illuminating the darkness. As she removed the scroll, the hum diminished and the fissure in the cave wall began to close slowly, with the same grinding sound as before. Clara hurried out, barely squeezing through before the rock sealed itself again with a dull thud, as if it had never been opened. Back in the shelter, the air felt warmer, and her children still slept, oblivious to the discovery. Clara snuggled close to them, the stone scroll in one hand, the glowing objects in the other. The map in her hands wasn't just a guide to unknown places, it was a promise, a trail of breadcrumbs that fortune had left for her. Hunger and cold were still real, but now Clara had a direction. The city was still a goal, but perhaps not the only one. The flickering light of the objects and the bluish glow of the map were now a dual beacon, illuminating not only the night's darkness, but also the uncertain path ahead. She knew the journey would be long and perilous, but for the first time since her world collapsed, Clara felt she was no longer adrift. She had a purpose, and a map to guide her. The first hint of dawn painted a faint grey in the eastern sky, filtering through the cave's mouth and dispelling the deepest shadows. Clara was still awake, the glowing objects and the stone scroll resting carefully in her lap. The warmth radiating from the gems was constant, a physical and emotional comfort against the cold that still insisted on biting the air. The map, now more than a curiosity, was a silent promise, its blue symbols pulsing softly like a sleeping heart. She watched Maria and Tomas, still curled into each other, their faces pale and lips chapped. Hunger was a constant ache in her own stomach, and she knew it would be even worse for them upon waking. The map showed several points, some distant, others closer. The point representing their location still pulsed with an intense glow, but one of the closer points, a few hours' walk away, caught her attention. It was situated in a depression, near a winding river that the map clearly delineated. What would be there? Another treasure? Fresh water? Food, perhaps? A new sound? A soft gurgle came from Tomas's stomach. He stirred, his eyes slowly opening, blinking in the gloom. "Mama?" he murmured, his voice hoarse. "I'm here, my love," Clara replied, squeezing him gently. Maria also began to stir, rubbing her eyes. "I'm hungry," Maria said, her voice thin, almost a wail. Clara felt a pang in her chest. "I know, my angels, but look what the mountain has given us." She lifted the stone scroll, allowing the bluish glow of the symbols to illuminate the children's faces. Maria's eyes widened. "Wow, what is it, Mama? Is it magic?" "Perhaps," Clara smiled faintly. "It's a map, and it will guide us to where we can find what we need." She pointed to the nearest spot on the map that wasn't the city. "I think this place might have water and, with luck, something for us to eat." The idea of food and water lit a spark in the children's exhausted eyes. Clara's despair transformed into cold determination. They couldn't stay in the cave. They needed to move. The wind outside had lessened, though the air was still biting. The sky was overcast, but the rain seemed to have passed. Clara folded the torn blanket, securing the glowing objects and the stone scroll in a cloth tied to her waist. She gave the children a piece of dry bread she had saved for days, hard and almost tasteless for them to share. It was little, but it was something. "Come on, my loves," she said, rising with a groan of pain in her back. Her muscles ached and were tired, but the vision of the map in her mind propelled her. "Let's go down the mountain. The map will show us the way." The descent was easier than the climb, but still treacherous. Loose stones rolled beneath their feet with each step, and the ground was slippery from the night's rain. Clara held the children's hands firmly, her eyes fixed on the terrain ahead, while her mind processed the map's information. The pulsating point at her waist seemed to vibrate softly, indicating the direction. They followed a dry stream bed that the map showed, its banks full of pebbles and rounded stones. The stream bed led them downwards, into a narrow wooded valley, where the vegetation was denser and the air more humid. The distant murmur of a river became more audible, a welcome sound that promised the much-needed water. The point on the map pulsed with greater intensity now, and the subtle hum of the objects at her waist became clearer. They were getting closer. Finally, after hours of walking, the valley opened into a clearing. A river of clear, swift waters snaked through the center, its banks covered in lush greenery. Clara felt immense relief. Water. She knelt at the bank, allowing her children to drink first, watching them with profound gratitude. The water was cold and sweet, washing the dust and weariness from their throats. While the children played by the bank, Clara consulted the map again. The pulsating point was exactly there, in the center of the clearing. But what was special about this place beyond the water? She scanned the area. There were no structures, no signs of civilization, just tall trees and the river. Suddenly, the map's bluish glow intensified, and the hum of the objects at her waist transformed into a sharper sound, almost a hiss. The point on the map, previously static, began to vibrate and expand, projecting a small holographic image above the stone scroll, an unknown flower with wide petals and a soft glow that seemed to grow from the soil. Clara looked at the image, then at the clearing's ground. Her eyes scoured the grass and fallen leaves, and there it was, hidden beneath a bush, a flower identical to the projection, its petals emitting a pale and almost imperceptible glow. It was unlike any flower she had ever seen. Carefully, Clara approached. The flower seemed made of a translucent, almost crystalline material. A sweet, earthy aroma emanated from it. She knelt and, hesitating for a moment, touched one of the petals. At that very instant, a wave of warm, invigorating energy coursed through her body, and the hunger in her stomach subsided. A soft, sweet taste filled her mouth. She plucked the flower. It was light, and its texture was almost like a soft fruit. She divided it into 3 pieces, offering one to each child. "Eat," she said, her voice full of wonder. "I think it's food." Maria and Thomas bit into the flower with hesitation, but their eyes widened as they tasted its sweetness and felt the sensation of satiety that followed. The sparkle in their eyes was the greatest treasure Clara could wish for. The flower not only relieved their hunger, but seemed to have revitalized their weary spirits. Clara looked at the map again. The point now glowed with a softer light, as if its mission there had been accomplished. The clearing wasn't just a water source, it was a source of sustenance. The map wasn't just a guide. It was a provider, The journey was still long, but now they had more than just hope. They had a path, and the path was beginning to give them what they needed to survive. The gentle sound of the flowing river and the renewed laughter of her children were the sweetest melody Clara had ever heard. The renewed laughter of her children, echoing softly with the river's murmur, filled Clara with a long-forgotten tranquility. She watched Maria and Tomas, their faces now rosier, their eyes sparkling with a childlike curiosity that hunger and fear had overshadowed. The flower, which seemed to have sprung from a fairy tale, not only appeased their hunger, but infused them with vibrant energy. Clara felt the same. The weariness that weighed on her shoulders lessened, and the ache in her muscles subsided. The sweet, earthy taste of the flower still lingered in her mouth, a reminder that the world, despite its cruelty, still held wonders. She looked at the stone scroll in her hands. The point marking the clearing now pulsed with a soft, steady light, different from the intense glow before, as if it were satisfied. Her eyes scanned the map, following the thin lines that stretched to other points. One of them, a little more distant but still reachable before nightfall, caught her attention. It was located on an elevation, surrounded by what the map delineated as unusual rock formations. "Mama, can we eat more?" Maria asked, pointing to where the flower had grown. Clara smiled. "I think we should save these for an emergency, my love. But the map will show us where to find more things like this, or perhaps other surprises." Tomas, ever the practical one, asked, "Are we going to the city now, Mama?" The city, once her only beacon, now seemed a distant and uncertain destination. The map had opened a new path, one that promised more than just survival, but perhaps a chance to rebuild their lives. "Not now, my love. The map shows us another place we need to visit first. I think the mountain still has more to offer us." The shadows of the trees began to lengthen, and a subtle chill descended upon the clearing. They needed to find shelter before nightfall. Clara put away the scroll and the glowing objects, which continued to emit a comforting warmth, tied to her waist. "Come on, my angels. The sun is setting." The climb was steep and demanded all her strength, but the renewed energy from the flower propelled her. The children, surprisingly, seemed less tired, their steps firmer. The hum of the objects at her waist intensified as they approached the new point on the map, and the bluish glow of the scroll, even when put away, seemed to vibrate against her skin. The terrain became rockier, with formations that looked like natural sculptures, rising like giant fingers pointing to the sky. The wind, which had been merely a whisper before, now whistled through the rock crevices, creating a ghostly sound. Clara squeezed the children's hands, her heart beating faster. With each step, she felt a strange pull, an invisible force drawing her forward. They reached the top of the elevation as the last rays of sun painted the sky orange and purple. The view was breathtaking, but her eyes were fixed on the ground. In the center of a small depression between the rocks, the map projected a new holographic image, not a flower but a strange structure, almost like a faceted stone, emitting a pale glow. Clara looked at the ground. There, partially covered by moss and dry leaves, lay an irregularly shaped stone, but with a surprisingly smooth surface. She knelt, pushing aside the moss. The stone was not ordinary. It seemed made of a material that absorbed the scant remaining light and reflected it with an internal glow. It was cold to the touch, but emitted a subtle, almost inaudible vibration that resonated through her fingers. Tomas approached, his curiosity overcoming his fear. "What is it, Mama? Is it something else to eat?" "No, my love," Clara replied, her voice a whisper. She felt she was on the verge of another significant discovery. The stone had fine carvings, almost invisible at first glance, that seemed to form a complex pattern, similar to the symbols on the scroll. As Clara traced the carvings with her fingertip, a deep, resonant sound, like a distant bell, echoed through the rock. The stone began to vibrate more intensely, and the carvings lit up with a silvery light, revealing themselves to be a control panel. In the center, a small recess slowly opened, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside rested a small object, wrapped in thin, dusty fabric. Clara picked up the object. It was an ancient compass, made of dark, polished metal, but without a needle. Instead, a small crystal pulsed softly in its center, emitting an emerald-green light. At her touch, the compass vibrated, and the crystal emitted a stronger pulse, projecting a green beam of light that swept across the terrain, stopping at a large rock formation a few meters away. The green beam of light, thin and precise, seemed to point to a crack in the rock that Clara hadn't noticed before, hidden by the twilight's shadow. It was an entrance, almost imperceptible, to some dark, unknown place. The compass in her hand wasn't just a navigation instrument, it was a key, a guide to what the map didn't openly reveal. The wind whistled louder now, and the darkness of night began to swallow the landscape. Clara looked at the dark entrance, then at her children, whose wide eyes reflected the emerald light of the crystal. Fear mingled with excitement in her chest. The journey was deepening into mysteries she never imagined. They had food, they had a guide, and now they had a new tool. But what awaited them inside that crack? The answer was there in the darkness, calling to her. The emerald light beam from the compass danced in the growing darkness, drawing ghostly outlines in the rock fissure. Clara felt a shiver down her spine, but it wasn't just the night's chill. It was anticipation, the feeling of being on the verge of something monumental. She squeezed Maria and Tomas's hands, who huddled close to her, their small bodies trembling slightly. "It's dark, Mama," Maria whispered, her voice choked. "Don't worry, my loves," Clara replied, trying to infuse confidence into her own voice. "The compass will guide us, and we'll have a safe place to spend the night." With a final glance at the starry sky that was beginning to reveal itself, Clara took the first step towards the fissure. The air inside was cold and damp, with a smell of wet earth and ancient stone. The green light from the compass crystal was the only source of illumination, casting elongated and distorted shadows on the uneven walls. The hum of the objects at her waist became a constant murmur, as if they were responding to the compass's presence. They advanced cautiously. The ground was uneven, covered by small, loose stones that rolled beneath their feet, producing a dry sound. The fissure gradually opened into a narrow tunnel, whose walls seemed to have been sculpted by nature over ages, but with a strange symmetry in some places, as if ancient hands had worked there. Water droplets dripped from the ceiling at irregular intervals, and the soft sound of water falling into invisible puddles echoed in the darkness. The tunnel snaked downwards, the incline becoming steeper. Clara had to hold the children firmly to prevent them from slipping. The compass crystal pulsed with greater intensity with each step, and the green light beam seemed to strengthen, illuminating more of the path ahead. Suddenly, the tunnel opened into a larger chamber. The compass light revealed a cavernous space, much wider than Clara expected. The walls were of dark rock, but here and there veins of a shimmering mineral glowed with a pale luster, almost like stars trapped in the stone. The air was warmer here, and a profound silence hung, broken only by the distant echo of their own footsteps and the rhythmic sound of Clara's heart beating in her ears. In the center of the chamber, the compass stopped projecting its beam, and the crystal began to spin gently, emitting a diffused light that illuminated the floor. There rested a large, smooth stone slab covered by a tangle of carved symbols, identical to those Clara had seen on the stone scroll and on the stone that contained the compass. It was a map, or perhaps a calendar, or a story told in hieroglyphs. Clara knelt, running her fingers over the cold carvings. They seemed to radiate a subtle, almost palpable energy. Tomas, always curious, pointed to a particular symbol. "Look, Mama, it's just like the flower." Indeed, among the intricate patterns, there was a symbol that resembled the flower they had found in the clearing. Beside it, another symbol represented the tree trunk, and, to Clara's surprise, a third showed a stylized human figure holding an object that looked like the compass itself. As Clara observed the carvings, the compass in her hand vibrated again. The emerald crystal in its center flickered, and a small compartment opened on the side of the compass, revealing a second, smaller crystal with a bluish glow. It was the same shade of blue as the stone scroll. Clara picked up the blue crystal. At that very instant, the stone slab on the floor began to glow with a soft light, and the carved symbols lit up, pulsing in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. The chamber filled with blue and green light, and a low sound, like a chorus of distant voices, resonated through the walls, an ancient, mysterious melody that seemed to penetrate her soul. The melody grew in intensity, and a section of the chamber wall, which had seemed solid, began to move, revealing a hidden passage. Behind it, there was no longer darkness, but a golden, warm glow that invited discovery. The sound of the ancient voices echoed with a promise, and Clara realized that the compass was not only a guide to locations, but also a key to activating the secrets of that place. Her children, previously apprehensive, now watched with wonder, their faces illuminated by the magical light. The stellar map on the pillar of light shone, inviting them to move forward. The ancient melody in the chamber became a hymn of possibilities, and Clara knew that the mountain still held many secrets, and that they were only beginning to scratch the surface of a much greater truth. Clara felt the warmth of the golden glow envelop her face and her children's. The newly revealed passage was not a dark tunnel, but an entrance to a wide corridor, whose walls and ceiling were made of a smooth, polished material that reflected the light with an amber hue. There were no torches or lamps. The structure itself seemed to emit the illumination, as if the stone were alive with an internal energy. The air there was surprisingly fresh and clean, without the damp smell of the previous cave, and a soft hum filled the space, an almost inaudible melody that seemed to vibrate in the very air. Maria and Tomas let out small gasps of wonder. "It's beautiful, Mama," Maria said, her eyes wide. Tomas pointed at the walls. "It glows!" Clara squeezed their hands, a genuine smile spreading across her lips for the first time in a long while. "Let's see what else awaits us, my loves." They advanced, their footsteps almost inaudible on the perfectly smooth floor. The corridor was long, and every few meters, intricate engravings adorned the walls, telling a story in images that Clara couldn't fully decipher, but which seemed to represent celestial figures, constellations, and beings that resembled the compass bearers in their own symbols. The engravings seemed to move, as if animated by the golden light, and the hum in the air intensified slightly with each step. At the end of the corridor, an arched opening revealed a circular chamber of grand proportions. The ceiling was a vast dome, and within it, thousands of points of light twinkled, forming a dynamic stellar map. Constellations rotated slowly, planets traced silent orbits, and nebulae of soft colors floated like cosmic clouds. In the center of the chamber, a low pedestal supported a translucent crystal sphere, which pulsed with a bluish light, echoing the glow of the newly discovered crystal in Clara's compass. The sound of the ancient voices, which had been a distant murmur before, now became clearer, an ethereal harmony that seemed to come from all directions, enveloping them in its melody. The compass in Clara's hand vibrated more strongly, and the emerald crystal in its center began to spin rapidly, projecting a green beam of light that rose towards the crystal sphere on the pedestal. When the compass's green light touched the sphere, its blue glow intensified, and the stellar map on the ceiling ceased its movement, focusing on a single constellation that Clara vaguely recognized as the same one carved into the stone scroll. At the same time, the objects Clara carried at her waist, which she had found in the fossilized trunk, began to levitate slightly, emitting a soft metallic chime as they spun in the air. One of the objects, a small metal disc with engraved symbols, floated towards the crystal sphere and fit perfectly into a recess that Clara hadn't noticed before. The instant the disc connected, the sphere emitted a pulse of energy that made the floor vibrate softly beneath their feet. The stellar map on the ceiling transformed, and the highlighted constellation began to glow with a dazzling intensity, while a specific point within it expanded, revealing what appeared to be a planet. On the surface of this projected planet, a new symbol appeared, identical to the one representing the tree trunk, where Clara had found the compass. It was as if the universe were bending to show them the way, connecting the micro to the macro, the familiar to the cosmic. "Mama, what is that?" Thomas asked, pointing to the trunk symbol in the projection. Clara felt a wave of emotion wash over her. With each step, each discovery, the truth behind the trunk and the compass became grander and more complex. I think it's our home, Thomas, our first true home." The melody of the ancient voices in the chamber swelled, a triumphant chorus that seemed to celebrate the connection. The compass in her hand quieted, but the glow of the crystal sphere and the stellar map remained, inviting them to decipher the new message the universe presented to them. Clara knew that the fortune they sought was not merely material, but a heritage of knowledge and a legacy that defied comprehension itself. The path ahead was now illuminated by distant stars and the promise of an even greater secret waiting to be revealed. Clara felt a shiver run down her spine, not from fear, but from a profound reverence. The symbol of the trunk, their refuge, their first true home, now floated on a stellar map, an unmistakable mark on a distant planet. It was as if the entire universe were echoing her own journey, connecting the most humble point of her existence to the vast cosmos. The melody of the ancient voices in the chamber swelled, a triumphant chorus that seemed to fill every fiber of her being, a song of recognition and welcome. "Mama, what does it mean?" Maria asked, her voice soft, her eyes wide with wonder. I don't know for sure, my love," Clara replied, feeling the weight of the discovery and the grandeur of the moment. "But I think it's very important." She looked at the other objects that still floated gently beside her, emitting a soft, metallic chime. There was a small cylinder of polished metal, a thin plate with a strangely smooth surface, and an object that looked like a miniature sundial, but without hands. The compass in her hand, though now calm, still radiated a subtle warmth, as if it were alive. Clara reached out for the cylinder-shaped object. As soon as her fingers touched it, it moved with purpose, floating towards the crystal sphere on the pedestal. There was another recess on the sphere's surface, less visible than the first, but the cylinder fit there precisely, as if it had been made for that spot. A new pulse of energy, stronger than the previous one, emanated from the sphere, making the air vibrate softly and a deep hum resonate through the chamber walls. On the stellar map, the projection of the planet with the trunk symbol began to rotate slowly, revealing more of its surface. Imposing mountains, deep blue rivers, and vast forests were drawn in ethereal tones. But what most caught Clara's attention was a bright point in the middle of a mountain range, pulsating with the same emerald light as the compass crystal. The ancient voices intensified, and now Clara could distinguish words, though in a language she had never heard before. They weren't spoken words, but thoughts, feelings transmitted directly to her mind, a universal language of emotion and intent. She felt a sense of urgency, but also of hope. The message was clear, even without literal translation. Home is more than a place. It is a heritage, a responsibility. The path is open. The truth awaits. Thomas, with his childlike intuition, pointed to the projection. "There, Mama, the green light." Clara nodded, her eyes fixed on the glowing point. It was a beacon, a guide. The compass wasn't just showing the way to the chamber, but to something much larger. Something that transcended time and space. The fossilized trunk where they had found refuge wasn't just a hiding place, but a portal, a connection point to this vast network of knowledge. She took the thin plate that remained at her waist. This one, unlike the others, didn't float to the sphere. Instead, the crystal sphere, as if responding to her intent, projected a blue light beam directly onto the plate. The moment the light touched the metal, symbols identical to those on the stone slab on the floor and the stone scroll lit up on the plate's surface. They danced and rearranged themselves, forming a sequence, a kind of coordinate or code that Clara felt she would need to decipher. The crystal sphere, now with the disc and cylinder fitted, began to rotate on the pedestal, emitting a soft murmur. The stellar map on the ceiling moved rapidly, and the projection of the planet with the trunk symbol expanded, filling most of the dome. The green point in the mountains shone even brighter, and from within it a more detailed image emerged. An ancient, majestic structure, partially buried but unmistakable. It looked like a library, or perhaps an observatory, built with the same shimmering material that adorned the chamber walls. The melody of the ancient voices reached its climax, a sound that seemed to vibrate in the very air, a call that echoed in her soul. Clara felt a mental clarity she had never experienced before. The inheritance was not a fortune in coins, but a treasure of knowledge and a lineage she now felt she belonged to. The trunk, the scroll, the compass, everything was part of a puzzle that fit together to reveal a greater purpose. "Mama, shall we go there?" Maria asked, her eyes shining with adventure, her previous apprehension completely forgotten in the face of such wonder. Clara looked at her children, their faces illuminated by the chamber's magical light. The uncertainty of the future still existed, but now there was a path, a direction. The promise of a safe home, which she had made to them, was transforming into something much deeper and more significant. "Yes, my loves," Clara replied, her voice firm and full of new conviction. "We're going home, to our true home." The crystal sphere stopped rotating, and the stellar map on the ceiling fixed on the image of the ancient structure. A soft hum remained in the air, and the golden glow of the corridor walls seemed to intensify, as if they were awaiting her next move. Clara knew the journey wasn't over, but its purpose had never been so clear. The fortune she had found in the trunk wasn't just for survival, but to unravel a legacy, to protect a truth that she now felt was part of her own destiny. The next step would be the most important of all, a leap of faith towards the unknown, guided by the stars and the wisdom of her ancestors. Clara didn't hesitate. The image of the ancient, majestic, and partially buried structure pulsed on the chamber ceiling, an irresistible invitation. The melody of the ancestral voices still resonated, a vibrant echo that seemed to propel her. "Mama, where are we going now?" Maria asked, her voice full of a new and exciting curiosity. Clara squeezed her daughter's hand. "Wherever the truth leads us, my love, to our home." She knew that exiting the chamber would be the first challenge. The corridor that had brought them there was long and winding, and the engravings on the walls seemed to watch them. The compass, though calm, still radiated a comforting warmth in her hand. She looked at the thin plate she carried, where the symbols danced in an enigmatic sequence. It was a map, a code, and she felt that the third object, the miniature sundial, would be the key to deciphering it. With a final look at the crystal sphere, which now glowed with a constant and serene light, Clara guided her children back into the corridor. The hum in the air was less intense now, but the golden glow of the walls seemed to follow them, illuminating their every step. The ancient voices, once a triumphant chorus, were now a soft whisper, as if bidding them farewell, or perhaps wishing them good fortune. Upon returning to the stone scroll chamber, Clara felt a pang of nostalgia. That place, where everything had begun to reveal itself, now seemed a mere prelude. The stone slab on the floor still displayed the symbols, and Clara noticed a direct correspondence with some of those on the plate in her hands. It was as if the path were being revealed in layers, each discovery building upon the previous one. She laid the plate on the stone slab. Immediately, the symbols on the plate lit up with a soft glow, and those on the slab responded, emitting a faint pulse of light. Then, Clara picked up the sundial-shaped object. There were no hands, but its surface was adorned with complex markings that seemed to mirror constellations. When she placed it in the center of the plate, an emerald light beam, identical to the compasses, shot from the sundial to the plate, and the symbols on it stabilized, forming a clear sequence. They weren't words nor numbers Clara could recognize, but a combination of shapes and patterns that her mind somehow began to interpret. It was a language of location, a set of coordinates that pointed to a specific place on Earth, not to the distant planet on the stellar map, but to the exact spot where the ancient structure, the library or observatory, manifested in her own reality. The compass in her hand vibrated again, and the emerald crystal rotated, pointing in a specific direction. It wasn't north, nor south, but a spot among the mountains that stretched beyond the valley where the fossilized trunk lay. The trunk, their first refuge, now seemed a starting point, a portal to a greater journey. "Is it a map, Mama?" Thomas asked, his eyes fixed on the plate. "It's more than a map, my son," Clara replied, feeling the weight of responsibility, but also the excitement of discovery. "It's a calling." The message of the ancient voices resonated in her mind. Home is more than a place. It is a heritage, a responsibility. The path is open. The truth awaits. A shiver ran through her. The fortune was not just for her survival, but for the preservation of something much greater. They needed to leave. The journey would be long and perhaps dangerous, but the image of the ancient structure, now clear in her mind, was a beacon. She had promised her children a safe home, and now that promise transformed into a quest for a legacy, a purpose that transcended mere existence. Clara carefully put away the plate and the sundial, the compass held firmly in her hand. The golden glow of the corridor seemed to dim as they approached the exit, the natural light that awaited them outside. The mountain air, fresh and familiar, would be a stark contrast to the chamber's magic. As they emerged from the secret passage, the morning sun greeted them, bathing the mountainside in soft gold. The valley stretched below, and in the distance, Clara could see the silhouettes of the higher mountains towards which the compass pointed. The fossilized trunk, their former refuge, seemed small and insignificant now, but it was the starting point of everything. "Come on, my loves," Clara said, her voice full of determination. "We have a long way ahead of us." The melody of the ancient voices, though now inaudible, still echoed in her heart, a constant reminder of her mission. The destination was uncertain, but the purpose was clear. They were going home, to the true home of their lineage, to unravel the secrets of a heritage that stretched through the stars and was deeply rooted in the earth. The adventure had only just begun. The weight of that newfound truth was both a burden and a beacon for Clara. Before them, the mountains rose, imposing and silent, a monumental challenge. The compass in her hand pulsed softly, an emerald heart beating in sync with hers, pointing to the distant spot where the ancient structure awaited. "Is it very far, Mama?" Thomas asked, his voice small, but with a spark of adventure in his eyes. Clara smiled, squeezing her children's hands. "No matter how far, my loves, we will go together." The first few days were the hardest. The trail was steep and treacherous, the air thin, and the cold biting as they ascended. Clara used her experience of country life to find safe routes, identify edible plants, and build makeshift shelters at night. The sundial and the plate, safely stored in a makeshift pouch, were a constant reminder of her purpose. Sometimes, when exhaustion threatened to overcome them, Clara would take out the plate and the symbols would dance, a silent promise that they were on the right path. The ancestral voices, now more distant, were an encouraging whisper in her mind, a melody that propelled her forward. Maria and Thomas, despite their young age, showed surprising resilience. They marveled at the wild landscape, at the birds that flew over the peaks, and at the crystal-clear streams that flowed down the slopes. Their laughter, even amidst exhaustion, was Clara's driving force. Weeks turned into a month of arduous journey. Their clothes were worn, their bodies thin, but their spirit remained unbroken. Each day the compass seemed to shine with greater intensity, and the image of the ancient structure in her mind became clearer. Finally, after crossing a snow-covered mountain pass, a breathtaking view unfolded before them. There it was, partially buried on a vast hillside, yet still majestic. The ancient structure revealed itself. It wasn't a library or an observatory, as Clara had imagined, but something that seemed to be both, and much more. Built with a material that shimmered with an almost organic glow, the edifice seemed to have emerged from the mountain itself, its elegant geometric lines contrasting with the ruggedness of the surrounding rock. Large panels of opaque crystal adorned its walls, reflecting the sunlight in colorful prisms. A central arched portal was the only visible entry point, guarded by two colossal statues, almost indistinguishable from the rock, that seemed to watch the valley with empty eyes. The compass in Clara's hand began to vibrate violently, and the emerald crystal spun until it pointed directly at the portal. A low, deep hum emanated from the structure, a sound that seemed to resonate in her bones. The ancient voices, once whispers, were now a vibrant chorus, a song of welcome that filled the air. Is it our home, Mama?" Maria asked, her voice full of wonder and a touch of awe. Clara felt tears welling in her eyes. That place wasn't just a refuge. It was the culmination of a quest, the answer to a prayer. "Yes, my love," she replied, her voice choked with emotion. "It's our home, our true home." They descended the slope, each step bringing them closer to the mystery. As they approached the portal, Clara noticed that the statues weren't merely decorative. Their eyes, once empty, now seemed to follow them. The portal, with no visible doors, was a solid wall of softly pulsating light. Clara took the plate and the sundial from her pouch. The compass in her hand radiated an intense emerald light. She placed the plate in the center of the portal's arch. The symbols on it glowed, and those on the stone slab on the ground, which she hadn't noticed before, lit up in response. Then she positioned the sundial on the plate. An emerald light beam, identical to the compasses, shot from the sundial to the portal. Immediately, the light portal dissolved, revealing a dark, inviting passage. A soft hiss filled the air, as if the air were being sucked inward. Clara hesitated for an instant, the unknown ahead, but the warmth of the compass in her hand and the expectant faces of her children propelled her forward. She took the first step, and the sound of her feet on the floor was muffled, as if the air within the structure were different. The interior was vast and silent, illuminated by a diffused light that seemed to come from all directions, without an apparent source. Shelves, stretching as far as the eye could see, filled with strange objects and scrolls that weren't made of paper, lined the walls. In the center of the main chamber, a pedestal identical to the one that housed the crystal sphere in the fossilized trunk stood, but this one was empty. The ancestral voices intensified, no longer a chorus, but a harmonious symphony of knowledge and wisdom. Clara felt her mind expand, absorbing information that transcended language. She understood that the fortune was not gold or jewels, but the very essence of a lineage of knowledge keepers, responsible for preserving the history and wisdom of an ancient civilization, not just from Earth, but from the stars. The fossilized trunk, her refuge of despair, had been the portal, the first link in a chain that stretched through ages. That place, the true library or observatory, was the sanctuary of this legacy. Clara was the next guardian. She looked at her children, who watched everything with wide eyes of wonder. They would no longer be left to their own devices. They had a home, a purpose, a heritage that connected them to something greater than anyone could imagine. The promise of a safe home was not just a house of wood or stone, but a legacy of knowledge and a future of limitless possibilities. The worst of nightmares, the loss of everything, had indeed hidden the most incredible of fortunes. Clara was no longer a helpless widow, but the guardian of an ancestral truth, the matriarch of a new era for her lineage. And there, in the heart of the mountain, beneath the diffused light of ancient knowledge, she knew that the true adventure was only just beginning. They were home,